Hi everyone, welcome on my session about creating new Business Central application in a few seconds. My name is Kamil Sacek and I am Software Developer Department Manager in company NAVERTICA from Czech Republic, and I'm Microsoft MVP for Business Applications since 2005. During this session, I will show you our tool which we are using to automatize creation of a new Business Central application. And I will show you how it works inside. What we are doing when creating new application. In our case, it is creating new repository, filling some basic structures into that repository from our template application, and prepare that app, for example, setting some parameters and so on. And we create pipelines to build that app and release that app and test that app. What you will see is how we are using that. It's one way from many possibles, and I want to inspire you how these things could be done, and maybe you will use what you will see for your own purpose, for your own processes, and for your own people. How it works. The process is triggered from Azure DevOps. It means if I want to create new Business Central application, I go to the Azure DevOps pipelines and start one predefined pipeline manually. In background, it will start PowerShell and everything is done in the PowerShell. It means the Azure DevOps pipeline is just tool, just interface to run this PowerShell, and that's all. Now, that was nearly last slide, and because we are BC Tech Talk, we are going directly to look at how it works inside. First, Azure DevOps pipelines. I have a pipeline, BC Tech Talk, create new Business Central application. I will run the pipeline, and I need to fill some parameters here. I want to enter the application name, BC Tech Talk Speakers app. I will fill the repository name, BC Tech Talk Speakers app. User story. We are using configuration-driven development environment, and this process is creating even work item for my application, which saves the attributes of this application, describe that application, and I can connect this application to my user story I am going to implement by that application. It means if there is already user story ready for the development, I can put the ID of this user story and it will link the user story with my application. Now we don't have that. I will put 0 here. How many objects I want to have in my ID range, which I will get and which will be reserved for my application. Default count is 100. Start object ID is some ID from which we start our numbering, but it will find the next free unassigned ID range. Because I know which applications we already have, which ID ranges are used, it will assign me next ID ranges to prevent conflicts between the applications. I will select which branch from my template repository I want to use as a starting point for my application. I'm going to develop for version 17. It means it will take branch 17, where everything is ready for developing for Business Central version 17. It will be PTE, and that's all what I need to specify here. Run, and now I see that the build started. The pipeline is running and is doing something. It will take a few seconds, and the result will be repository with a prepared structure, then pipelines, which are building and testing the app, releasing it to QA database, pipeline for releasing to the customer's database if I want, and one pipeline which is testing periodically that app to vNext version or current version or any other version of Business Central, for example, during weekend. You can see that it took 21 seconds to create everything, and the result is here. If I refresh, I can see 3 pipelines: master, release, and standard build pipeline. And I see a repository with some structure. I'm creating the repository as a fork. You can see that it have different icon here. It's fork from our template repository. It means if I want to change something in my template, which should be implemented in all our apps, I can do that in my template, and I can do pull requests to all my apps to apply this change to these apps. For example, if I find out that I need to add or change some property in my app.json and put that change to all apps, I can do that from the template, and everyone can pull these changes to their repositories for their apps. You can see that I'm using workspace with multi-root or multi-root workspace for VS Code. That workspace is named with the repository name, or that's part of the process. I have 2 roots, two apps in my repository: main app, which is the app itself, and test app, that's application testing that main app. And if we look into the main app app.json, we have the name of the app prepared here with some description and generated new ID. And if we look to the test app app.json, we have this again new ID, pre-prepared name, and in dependencies we have dependency on our main app with the correct ID, with the correct name. Yeah, everything is ready, and I can start to use these apps and develop. If we look into the ID ranges, I have some free ID range assigned to my app. I put 55000 to the pipeline when creating the app, but it finds that these are first not assigned IDs, and I receive them. That's the pre-prepared app, and yeah, I'm ready to develop. How it looks inside the pipeline and the script. This is the pipeline itself. The pipelines have a possibility to use runtime parameters since I think some spring update of Azure DevOps. And you can see that those are the parameters we were entering when running the pipeline. Yeah, the object IDs. You can see that it could be number, string with predefined values. It means you can select through the lookup and so on. There is no trigger for that pipeline because it's manual pipeline, manually triggered, and I'm generating the name for the build from the app name itself. If we look at the pipeline, you can see that the pipeline was named BC Tech Talk Speakers App .2, and that's the name which was generated automatically from the app name I entered in the runtime. And what it is doing, it is checking out our repository with the script, and we are running the script through the PowerShell with all the parameters which we need. And one special parameter is passed through the environment variable. It is the system access token, because inside the script we are connecting to the repository itself. We are cloning and pushing the repository back to the Azure DevOps, and we need to authorize to the Azure DevOps somehow. And because the process is running on the agent somewhere on the server, this agent needs some access token to be able to access that Azure DevOps. This is the access token, and we are passing it through the environment variable because this variable is encrypted, hidden. Yeah, it's secure string. It means it must be passed in this way. That's all from the pipelines. That's the YAML file, and here is the script. We have parameters which we need for this for everything, and now I'm preparing the headers for the REST API. I'm using the access token if passed, or if I don't have the access token, for example, when running the script manually from PowerShell, I'm using personal access token, which I can enter as a parameter, and then using the basic authentication, not the bearer one, for the access token. Then we are creating the repository. You can see that I'm just selecting the correct branch, from which repository I'm forking. It's predefined in my script. You can do that dynamically. And the request for the API is this one. Sorry, just name for the new repository, ID of the project, and because we are forking, we are entering parent repository ID and project ID. If you skip that, you will just create a new repository which will be empty. And we are calling the API here and just remembering the URL for the repository. Then if we are using PTE, we are searching for the empty ID range which we can assign to that application. We are using the work item query language for that. That's the query. Just selecting IDs for work items of type feature, because we are using the type feature as description of our existing applications. Sorry. Going through these work items, in some custom field we have the ID ranges which are assigned to that application, and then I'm going through all these work items, going through these ID ranges, splitting them and so on, searching for the next unassigned IDs which I can assign now. Now I have a result ID range which will be assigned later to the app. Then we are registering that app to our Azure DevOps. It means we are creating work item of type feature. If you want to know more about that, watch my session, configuration driven development environment, how it works and how we are doing that. We are creating work item of type feature with filling some title, repository URL, which is our custom field. It means we are saving the URL of the repository for that app, ID range and other things. Just create it. Then if we enter the work item of type user story ID, the user story ID for which we want to connect that application, we are adding link between this user story and the feature we created in previous step. That's the body for the REST API call, just adding that link. Now we clone the repository locally to be able to update the code inside the repository. To be able to clone, we need to authenticate to the Azure DevOps somehow. And here we can use the HTTP extra header parameter of the Git, where we can set authorization header for the HTTP, and we are using the authorization header I prepared in the first step with the access token or the personal access token. We will clone, check out the correct branch in the repository, find the workspace file, rename it to the name of the repository. Then we read the app.json for the main app, generate new ID for that app, assign the name, description, ID range. The same for test app, In the test app, we will update the dependency. If it is app ID or ID, depends on the version of Business Central you are using. And then committing all the changes and pushing back to the repository again with the authorization. It means now we have the repository with updated app.jsons, and of course you can do whatever you want in the code to be ready for development. And now we are creating the pipelines for our application. First, we are creating standard build pipelines from our YAML file, which is part of the template I just used for my app. If you want to create the YAML pipeline, you need to use these two parameters, YAML file name and type2. Then for which repository we are creating that pipeline, which agent queue should be used, and triggers which should be used. In this case, it's continuous integration. It means automatically started when you push the changes to the repository. And just calling the REST API. Same thing, we will create the release pipeline from different YAML file in the repository without any trigger, because the release is manually triggered. And same, we will create the pipeline for testing the application with vNext version of Business Central, just using different pipeline again in the repository without any trigger, because this YAML file have schedule inside. It means this pipeline is scheduled. For example, I'm using schedule to run it during the weekend, each time during the weekend, and creating that pipeline. If you want, you can queue first build for the pipeline if you want, and it's easily done by this REST API on that address with this content, just ID of the pipeline itself, the definition. It means what we created in previous steps, and the project ID, calling the REST API, it will trigger the pipeline, and it will start build your first version of your empty application. And cleaning up. That's all. There is no more magic behind, just calling the REST API, cloning the repository, and modifying the files inside the repository and pushing back the changes. What you need to know is the structure of the request for the REST API. For the YAML pipeline is that part, and authorization to the repository through that part, HTTP extra header. Those were the parts which took me most of the time to find out, because it's hard to find some information regarding that, but I think now you have much easier work, because I'm telling you how to do that. That's all from me. That's all how to create your new Business Central application in few seconds. You saw that it took only 21 seconds. All depends on the the speed of the agent, and you don't need to do anything manually in that. Just enter the values. Every developer could create the app if he needs. The app is forked from some template which is pre-prepared. It means it could include everything what you need, all the settings and so on. And in few seconds you are ready to create your application. Yeah. Thanks for watching that, and I'm waiting for your questions after this session. Thanks. Bye.